Hi, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. There are 2 extra sandwiches up here, so if you're very hungry, I hope you will beat my cousin up here and take them before he does. It's my pleasure today to introduce our speaker, Santiago Legarre, who has not only been a frequent visiting professor here the past few years, but is also a personal friend of mine. And the first law school class I attended was sitting in on his class here in maybe 2014 or 2015 when he was visiting and teaching a class on comparative constitutional law. So that was my first exposure to law school. Santiago, in addition to visiting and teaching here at Notre Dame Law School, is a professor of law at Catholic University in Argentina, and also spends time as a visiting professor at Swarthmore Law School in Kenya. He earned his law degree from Catholic University in Argentina and then studied at Oxford and received a master's in legal research under the supervision of John Finners, who teaches on the faculty here, and then received his PhD back in Argentina at the University of Buenos Aires. After clerking on the Supreme Court in Argentina, he started teaching law, which he's been doing since then. And his main research interests are jurisprudence and comparative law, comparative constitutional law. Today, he's going to offer some reflections on his experience teaching law students in Kenya, in Argentina, in various places in the United States. And I think he'll probably talk for about half an hour, and then we'll have time for questions and answers after that. So please join me in welcoming Santiago.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction of a friend. It's always a mystery to me why students go back, but even more so when in this particular case where it would be so easy and warranted to leave at any point, being far makes it more difficult. At the same time, because you're eating and because I don't know what would happen, I will not invite you to come closer to me, in which case you would just confirm that I'm not a monster or anything like that. And I'll come back to this because the way you're seated right now, including the 3 professors in the back, and unlike my friend Debbie here, is very relevant for part of what I'm going to say later. So first, how does a person, not that perhaps it will matter to you, do to teach across 3 continents? I didn't pick the particular title for the talk, which was one of the several titles the talk had. You know, you will give talks and they will have many titles, you'll see. In Argentina, they teach us there are 5 continents. So if we count the Americas as one of the 5, as we do, then I would teach in 2, which would be Africa and America, including North America and South America. Of course, 3 sounds a bit of more grandeur than 2, but the continents were not in the title, but rather, as in the poster, the countries, mostly. Hemispheres. This is the way you do it if you ever want to do what I've been doing for 16 or so years now. You play with the hemispheres. So today I greeted a friend in Argentina, and I told her I'm writing to you from the cold and the snow of South Bend, and she replied, she doesn't know what she's saying, of course, but she replied, I envy you so much. Of course, because there it's like 95 degrees right now. So the hemispheres are crucial. I come here in my summers, and you know how it is. We have academics, or at least most of us, very long breaks. So you can play with part of those breaks and you can use your imagination, and if you have a poor imagination, you decide to come to South Bend in your summer. And that's what I did for the first time in 1997. I arrived in late August, and I thought, this is the place where I want to be. But then I learned the truth of the matter as the year unfolded. And the only reason I come in the worst time by far to come is that it's either that or not to come, because then in 97 I was a student, but now I teach back home, and now there's nothing going on, but on March 15th, more or less, our first semester starts. Second semester starts around August 15th, so that you can compare and contrast and understand how I play with it. Of course, you also need to understand the definition of semester, because otherwise this won't make sense. This definition, of all places, I learned here, and it is the following. A semester is a quadrimester that lasts 3 months. In other words, we talk again with grandeur about the fall semester, but if you count the weeks that you're actually taught, you will count 14 or 16, 17, or more likely in my country, 13, which means that you have a lot of time to decide that you will be elsewhere if you want to, that is, if you're interested for whatever reason. Then there is Kenya. Kenya is on the equator. You may think that it's really hot there, but Nairobi, the capital, it's at what, 5,500 feet, more or less. I suppose that's what 1,700 meters are, more or less. So it's really cool and perfect in Nairobi all year long, because it's on the equator. The temperature doesn't change very much throughout the year. And their calendar there is the following. Their first semester starts on July 1st, and their second semester starts on November 15th, which means that the beginning of their first semester overlaps neatly with my winter break. Now, we also have a very long winter break, unlike you. Why? Because in my part of the world, and not only in Argentina, the final exams are oral exams. And this means that you need a lot of time for people to sit and give their oral exam. An oral exam will go for hours, typically 1 hour every student, but then there are many students, as many as here, and there are many classes. So you need many weeks of exams. So overall, it's a long period of exams, but for me, it's very short. I need to be there only once or twice. So what I do is I put the dates of those exams really early and then to Kenya since 2012. So that's like an introduction of how this happens. Second thing, and this is the one that we'll have to do with the seating chart today, is the contrast between law as an undergraduate degree and law as it is in the United States. I was so confused when I first came in '97 with the fact that as a visiting scholar here, I would meet students who had done previously physics or mathematics or history, more commonly, or English. And then I realized that these guys were now going to have another degree, the JD. So I went to someone whom I thought was knowledgeable and asked this person, may I ask you, is law school grad school in the United States? Now this question then I've revisited many times, and I've got so many different answers, so much so that I came to the conclusion that not many people know very well the answer to this question. What is clear, in any case, for purposes of my point now, is that it's not undergraduate school. And then perhaps it's not grad school, but it's more like a professional school, and perhaps increasingly so. And more on that later. In Argentina, in Kenya, in Europe, I would say in the rest of the world, except for some parts of Canada, it's not so. Law is one of the several options that a kid has when he graduates from high school. So when I taught first-year classes in law school, I would have 17, 18-year-old students as we finish high school a little bit earlier than you. So if someone asks me, what's your main observation teaching in these different places, my main observation has to do with this, with the circumstance that you are teaching in the United States a group of people that will include people who are married, people who have children, and certainly people who have a previous degree. Now, I think there are three theories about whether this should make a difference or not, and why, when it comes to teaching JDs as opposed to teaching undergraduates, which I do in Kenya and I do in Argentina. So the first theory is that, yes, there will be many practical differences when it comes to how you will focus your education of those students, because the graduate students, because the JD students don't need some disciplinary guidance that the undergraduates do need. This would be the first theory. They just do it without the need of a metaphorical whip. For example, punctuality. I remember coming to class when I started teaching, and I was really amazed here that the normal thing would be for everyone to be in the class, even if Chick-fil-A wasn't being served. And the professor would typically be the last person to arrive in the room. Not so, my friends, in Argentina or in Kenya or in Italy or anywhere else. You know, punctuality is a struggle. You need to talk about it. You need to think about measures, disciplinary measures. So, for example, some professors have a system for the door of the classroom where you press the button from the inside so that if a person arrives after 12:30, the person will try to enter the room, but they will not be able to. Or you can penalize with, some grade deduction, the tardy persons, and so on. Now there is a second theory, and the second theory comes to the same conclusion, namely that you need to treat them differently, the way perhaps most of your professors treat you differently from the way you were treated by your professors in college, maybe. Perhaps you won't like what I'm going to say now, but you've had the Chick-fil-A already. So at least maybe it'll be in gratefulness, not to me, but to the St. Thomas More Society, to which I'm very grateful, by the way, that you will have to cope with this. So the second theory is, yes, treat them differently because it's too late. They are spoiled already. So nothing you will do will make any difference. I mean, look at their age, look at their time in life. You you will need to pretend all the time that you don't know what's going on whenever something goes on that is not what you expect. For example, in this very room, the following thing went on a few years ago. And I pretended I didn't know. And in Argentina, I wouldn't have done that. A friend of mine who was studying engineering or something like that was interested in coming to one of my classes because he was interested in the topic of that particular class. So he came. Now, using more of an attitude I would use with undergraduates, I had all those law students sit in the first two rows, unlike what I did with you, to be nice, basically. But these guys, you know, they needed my grade, so I want you here. You need to bargain with older people. Alas, we are all the time with older people in different circumstances. You can't just tell them, you know, no cell phones so easily. You pay a price, so you think about it when you're going to pay the price. So my friend sat there where you are. And right here sat one of my brightest students, a girl. And I had then a no laptop policy. And, you know, I was very proud of the way my no laptop policy was happening. I was really proud. You know, we were now in week 3. This was a short course like the ones I do here. And, you know, I could see that people were looking at me the way you are, some or most of you now. But now I know better. I know better that I should have remembered that pride is always bad, always bad. Because that day, as we were walking from class with my engineer friend, he said, you want me to tell you something really funny? Now, when they tell you that, you know it's not going to be funny. The girl who was exactly in front of me had her laptop on her lap, hidden by this little thing, which we should remove if this were an undergraduate course, just kidding. And, you know, she was smiling at you and saying this or that, but, you know, down there she was checking the results of the MBA and so on and so forth. You know, all the kinds of things that students do, that is, undergraduate students do, when you let them, when those naive professors let them. So that's the second theory. And the second theory comes to the same conclusion. Don't do anything, not because they are perfect, but because they are too imperfect. Instead, the kid is, you know, more bland, more permeable. You are still in time to introduce a change in the life of that person in terms of education. You see how what is behind this is a theory of teaching law at the undergraduate level as education, not just conveying some professional skills, but trying to also help the students who are very young to build their own character. And therefore, as in the movies, there are so many conversations between this professor who is now a mentor and this student who wants to know more about life. But these movies are mostly about undergraduate students. Now, here is the third theory. The third theory is that you should also do that with JDs. You should also try to help them build their character, because law school is not or should not be merely about instruction, but also, or even most importantly, about formation. Instruction, formation, they could be empty words, but I think you know where I'm coming from at this point. At a practical level, this will mean that even in a law school, you will have those kinds of conversation that you see in the movies. And sometimes a professor who is also a mentor in law school, and I've seen this happening in this law school and in others as well, will be there for a student in moments when the student needs particular support, and at the same time will give advice, will help when it comes to finding a job. Of course, he will never be a friend to a student while he's or she is still a student, but you know what I mean. Right? In fact, I want to say that those of us who have been trained to teach this way I called education with some grandeur. Again, we receive our greatest joys in teaching, not from the classroom, not from giving instruction, which is important, very important, but mostly from interactions that happen as a result of the classroom or after the classroom, where the professor now realizes that, well, maybe after all, it did make a difference in the life of this person. And that's really more moving for some of us than getting an email because an article was published, or giving a good class that many times no one listened to because they were using their laptops or their phones, which by the way I would do too if I were a student, and I would be allowed, unless I'm being taught by Bill Gates, and probably after a little while I would still go to, there are so many interesting things there, aren't there? Right, so this is the third theory. I'm interested in your thoughts in the Q&A on whether, there should be a substantial difference between the way one teaches law in the undergraduate level and here in places like here. So that when law is an undergraduate degree, it is a longer degree generally. In my country, 5 years. So you graduate at the age of 22, 23. When I studied law, it was 6 years. In Europe, typically is 4 plus 2. 4 years of an undergraduate degree in law plus 2 of a master's degree, which everyone does. Almost no one in Europe finishes with the 4-year degree. So you can compare with 4 plus 3 and so on. Then there is the bar, but that is similar for both systems, although in Europe or in Kenya, it works a bit differently than from here. Typically, it takes a long full-time course that you need to do after law school to do the bar. Another difference, speaking of this, between law in Argentina and similar parts of the world, and law in Kenya, and as far as I see in the US, but feel free to correct me, is that in Kenya here, I got the impression that law is for smart people. And in Argentina, it's exactly the other way around. So it's the default degree. If you don't know what you want to do, like it was my case, then you study law. In fact, there is a saying for this in Spanish, which roughly translated goes, "You shall be what you ought to be, or you shall be a lawyer." But here I don't get that impression. It's so expensive. And in Kenya, certainly the brightest people go to law. In England, many bright people go to law. So I don't know what happens there really. Okay, in Kenya, I have developed, well, maybe that's too much of a verb, a system of teaching with drawings. Now, that is something that I don't think a JD student would take happily, the way they did when I came to the classroom and I said, okay, for next class, you will have to draw the separation of powers, or you'll have to chart the federal judiciary in a map with your own hands. I'll show you in a minute a video of how the drawing system worked. I used it initially for them to try to learn something and then put it on this drawing by painting or doing a mosaic or just drawing, the way I did when I was in law school, where I would draw for myself to try to understand something. You know how educational psychologists hold that most of us are what people know as visual learners. So we read, that's not good. They talk to us, that's not good. But when we see something, then that's it. So that's what I was trying to cater for, that kind of development. And I question whether that adventure, that experiment would be possible at a US law school without you being fired or without some picket by the students who are now saying, there is a guy here who is not that he wants us to go back to college or to high school. He wants us to go back to elementary school. Well, maybe we should. Because, you know, the general gist of this is that everything is more or less the same, I think. It's just that only out of prudential considerations, you won't do some things because people would react, they would feel offended or something, but why should they? I say. I also used the system for tests. So when I got bold, I gave an option to answer half of the questions in a test with a drawing. And those who chose that option would have some more time to answer. That went really well. Half the people chose to draw in the exams when they had this option. This is in a small piece of paper. You will see in the video the bigger drawings that they did for a contest. This is a contest where these people, they were in second year of law school, so they were 19 years old, more or less. One of them is actually now here doing an LLM at Notre Dame Law School. I sent him an email, but I sent it to a Yahoo mail I had from him, so I don't know that he knows I'm about to show a video where he features. So they were in that class 75 students. The way the system works, as in golf, is that I make a first cut where half of the 75 are out of the competition. Those that my teaching or drawing assistants consider together with me the inferior ones. Now by superior and inferior here, when we are evaluating law students, I don't mean superior Michelangelo or whoever painted the Columbus paintings, but rather someone who could convey without words, that's the key, or with the few words possible, a certain concept. We used it with many concepts. So the winners were not the artists, but the ones who efficiently conveyed that. So that someone who doesn't know what this is about, he sees the poster and says, bingo, this is federalism in the United States, to say just one example. Then we cut down to 16, and there was a tradition there to call these guys the Sweet 16, as you will see. And then we cut from 16 to 8, and then from 8 to a podium of 3, and then the winner goes to Prague. I made friends with some American guys who organized a leadership conference in Prague, and they agreed to help me give a scholarship to my Argentine students and Kenyan students who win these tournaments. 6 of them, 3 from Argentina, 3 from Kenya, have gone so far. now I can perceive that some of you are telling me, I too would like to go to Prague under those circumstances. So maybe next time I come here, maybe I should give it a try, and maybe I won't get fired. Maybe it's all about the banana, the Prague thing. Right. Why don't I show you then, let's see if I learned how to use this. This is a 5-minute video, and then I'll show you what I consider the best painting I've ever got on a constitutional law concept by a 21-year-old student. Of course, it doesn't work. What am I doing wrong? Maybe I'm forgetting something. Oh, it's there at least? Okay. Oh, okay. I see. I see. Perfect.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Amanda Kanya. Hi, I'm Wageshi Legarre. We're here today because Mr. Santiago Legarre came up with this really cool way of learning where we had to read on a concept and then we had to express it in an artsy kind of way, like a mosaic or a portrait or just a picture. So he picked the best 16, and they're the ones at the back. I don't know if you can see them. The winner gets to go to Prague. Prague is supposedly the most beautiful city in the world, but the winner will have to confirm this for us because we're a bit speculative about that.
Welcome to the final round of this drawings contest, the revamped Sweet 16. Why the revamped Sweet 16? As you know, because last year we chose 16 essays each week that would be discussed in class. Only 16 out of 75, and these were chosen by random. But now this revamped version of the 16 is not about essays and it's not about luck. It's about the posters illustrating the concept of the foundations of the regulatory state that were chosen by the teaching assistants, or you could say drawing assistants, as the best 16. The winner will be awarded a recommendation for a scholarship for the International Youth Leadership Conference in Prague next year. Before we do so, we will have the second of the songs we're having today to honor our 16 winners.
We are the champions, my friend. And we'll keep on fighting till the end. We are the champions. We are the champions. Don't be the losers, 'cause we are the champions of the world. come forth.
What I was trying to teach you.
I have to say it's like a really cool way that I've never actually been done before. And when I joined law school, I never thought that it would come and be drawing. Did you, Amanda? No. Yeah, I never thought that it. Especially when you told us, I was like, before you draw legal concepts, it was like that's the challenge. Yeah. That's the challenge.
Okay. By the way, singing is a big thing in Kenya, I imagine in Africa in general. So when I do the drawing contests in Argentina, there is no singing, but in Kenya in general, for example, when there is a speaker, there will be some singing before the lecture and after the lecture. So, I decided to. One of my students in Argentina who is a bit cynical would probably say that I decided to include it so as to occupy some more time of my class time. Well, I don't know. This is the drawing I was telling you about. The drawing, well, let me just not say anything for a minute. In fact, yeah.
What are the words?
Oh, the words, you have them right behind you, but they are the rights. Life, work, free movement, privacy, freedom of expression, religion, property. And then the E is for state in Spanish, Estado. So the plants, they need watering, they need some kind of fostering support by the government. That's the idea. And at the same time, the government will sometimes cut bits so that the flower can grow better. And then you see how the ones on the left, they have some kind of tutor or something to support the flower and its growth. I think, in fact, that in honor of the system and of the author, Sophia, I won't say anything because I think that by watching by looking at the picture, you can reach your own conclusions about how effectively or not one can use this. I've personally used this drawing many times to explain the interaction between what is called the power of regulation of police power and the rights. Thank you for your JD attention. It was very high. And I will take questions if there are any. Yes.
So this question more comes to you as a comparative constitutional expert. So this crisis in Venezuela, it seems like is solved or is hoping to be solved through Maduro being replaced by them invoking, and this is as deep as my knowledge goes, some obscure clause in their constitution that allows the Speaker of the House or their rough equivalent to become president in an emergency. And I'm for Nicolas Maduro being out. He's a crazy person. But how valid is this process that the president that most Western nations have recognized came to power?
Regrettably, I don't know the answer to your question.
Okay.
Oh, please.
Yes, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about how you got involved teaching in Kenya, like just how that happened.
Sure. I told you that when I finished high school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, and therefore I studied law. But since I was 5 until I was 17, it was very clear to me what I wanted to do. It's just that I had a gap in the last months of my senior year of high school when I lost what had always been my dream. When I realized that wasn't possible for me, then I was confused, and under confusion, one studies law. But I knew what I wanted. I wanted to study the animals, the African animals in particular. And I had been studying them forever, like since I was 5 or so, reading a lot, and mostly African, but a bit Asian too. Not very interested in American or European animals. Very interested in sea mammals as well. But then in Argentina, there wasn't such a degree that I could study then. There is now. So I studied law. Then one day, when I was old, my friend sends me this email with some amazing pictures of what they call in Kenya a safari. You know, he was there, and you know, there were lions, there were all the animals I always had dreamed to see. And he said, I came to this university, Strathmore, to teach a course, and I went on this safari, and I wrote him, like, without expecting much, oh, how wonderful it would be for me to do something similar. But this is a very special friend. So he operated for me. He started lobbying and networking and so on and so forth. And there I was in Kenya, where I taught a lot and teach a lot, but I also do a lot of animal watching. In fact, I started writing now as an amateur on conservation for a magazine there in Kenya called Suara. So that was it. Yes.
How would you compare the outcome of students as like lawyers once they get out of an American school or Argentinian school, or Americans, since that's more professional and finishing school type education? Are we more prepared to be lawyers than Argentinians are, or than Kenyans, or
I think that in some aspects, this is my opinion, you're asking me, so I give you my opinion. In some aspects, you are better equipped and prepared, and in some, you are worse equipped and prepared. So let me give you one example of each. I think that we have a curriculum where roughly 95% of the classes you take are mandatory. This is in general like that in that part of the world, which means that everyone graduates with a clinical view of the whole thing. And we always think that most American lawyers lack in that general vision. Some would say, well, they get it when they study for the bar. Some would say, no, because that's only a memory exercise. Now, where do I see you better equipped? I think that here in law school, as compared with in my part of the world, they train you more in some methods and skills that then will perhaps make it easier for you to handle some topic which is about some aspect of the law you know nothing about. You will still know how to find what you need to find. So as you will know about everything a bit, and that has advantages, but it has also disadvantages.
So you were talking about how you think the differences in the ends of education are different because in America.
A little bit louder,
Sorry,
please.
you're talking about how in America the end of the education is like preparation for a profession because it's a professional
Mhm.
school, and the other two countries it's more formation. And
Yeah.
you said that's because it's undergraduate. Do you think that has anything to do with America as the philosophy of education in America, which even in college it seems to be more about preparation instead of formation or virtue or anything like that? Or do you think that it's just the grad school undergraduate life?
I think there may be something of that as a difference. And as I was preparing the talk, and I was preparing this part of the talk, I made a little note that I can introduce now, and that is when I make the contrast between undergraduate and JD, we are assuming that undergraduate education is conceived as education, but that of course is not always true, especially when you think about technical undergraduate education, which is very necessary. And especially when you think of professional training, then it's more difficult to draw the contrast I was trying to draw, because it's not that you don't need to focus on the character now because you've done it before. You've never done it. You've never done it because you thought it was out of bounds, because you thought it was irrelevant, because if you thought it was for the parents to take care of, and many times those parents don't exist or don't undertake it. So yes, I agree that the contrast only makes sense when there is something before law school, and I don't know that there is always something that different from instruction before law school. I don't know. With us, imagine, just to give you an example, with us in law school, in my school, a Catholic school like this one, you have 2 required courses in philosophy and 2 in theology. We're talking about law school. And there, the professors, of course, they go farther afield in talking with their students about important questions than when they get taught in 5th year patent law or property law. Does that? Okay. Thank you, guys. All the best.